Hello, everybody. Recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples from ZachCouples.com with episode number 5 of the Movement Debrief. Thanks for being here, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about 3 things. Why you probably should stay in the sagittal plane a bit longer. How to progressively coach up your exercises to maximize client retention, performance, and compliance. And then lastly, detaching from situations within clinic so you can be a better clinician. So before we dive into that, let's go through a little bit of housekeeping. I hope you guys checked out the blog that I put out on Monday. It was a big mofo. It was on the 90-90 hip lift, another movement deep dive, and got into a little bit of mechanics with it, a little bit of the whys, the whos, the whats, whens, wheres, and whys. It was a lot of fun doing, and I've gotten good feedback, so I hope you guys like that. The other thing, if you haven't signed up for my newsletter on ZachCouples.com, you should do that because I just hooked you guys up with a free, acute to chronic workload calculator. So if you are a fan of Tim Gabbett's work, you might want to get that because at least I haven't found a good way to calculate this on a regular basis. So with some inspiration from some colleagues, I kind of made my own. So I hope you guys use that. Sign up for the newsletter. All right, let's dive into it. So first topic, sticking with the sagittal plane. So I had this guy, and he was developing bilateral knee pain. And, we did a few things here and there, and it was getting better. But he was just a stiff guy, limited motion. And so, gave him a couple things to stretch out his hips, so on and so forth. And I tested him on the table, and we looked at the Ober's test and hip rotation in terms of internal. Both of those were full and normal. Yet we were still having some problems because he couldn't touch his toes and had a limited straight leg raise. Also had limitations in hip external rotation. And so in the past, and I made this mistake with him as well, when I see those negative Ober's tests, that tells me, well, hey, we probably cleared some stuff. We probably have good sagittal plane motion, and we could probably start addressing some frontal plane mechanics. And so this is like the one time where if I see a limited straight leg raise, I may actually stretch the hamstrings or do something with neural tension or neurodynamics, whatever you want to call it. So I gave him a couple things. We tried like the downward dog position because that still emphasizes some, abdominal work, which we were working on. Stretches out the posterior chain. Did a little bit of leg lowering, and nothing seemed to budge. And so I was kind of thinking to myself, where do I go from here? Do I start addressing frontal plane stuff? But the guy can't touch his toes. We need to make this happen. The one thing I didn't check, and shame on me for doing this because I just put out a post on it, but I didn't check his functional squat. So it's not like a front squat or anything like that where we're loading this activity, but can he maximally flex all joints and drop into a squat? And even with a 10-pound counterweight, this guy couldn't do it. And so what did we do? We worked on his ability to squat. And I just had him sit in that position, emphasize breathing so we could open up that posterior outlet a bit more, make sure he had sagittal plane control and could completely relax all the extensors. We did a little bit of that, and then we did a little bit of some split squats where I put the weight in the ipsilateral side. So if I'm doing a split squat and let's say left leg's in front, weight would have been on the left side. Little trick, that's a great way to actually stretch out the posterior hip because it pulls you into that hip a bit more. And so with the combination of those two activities, had a normal straight leg raise, was able to touch his toes. So the point of this story is, I think as we go through our progressions, a lot of individuals emphasize triplanar motion. Hold your horses. You want to make sure that before you even think about going into the frontal or transverse planes, you have your patients damn near mastering the sagittal plane. How do I know that I've mastered the sagittal plane? 3 things you got to look at. Numero uno. Make sure your passive sagittal tests. And so things I look at: shoulder flexion, straight leg raise, an Ober's test, ability to extend the hip. You got to make sure those are clear, period. Once that's done, you got to see if they can control sagittal plane dynamically. So first thing that'll be is standing reach test, or can they touch their toes? If they can do that, that shows they can at least maximize flexion of the trunk. Last thing, make sure they can squat to a decent depth, functional squat that is. So what I look for is have them touch their toes, see if they can descend into a squat, and we're shooting for hips to be as close to parallel as possible, or thighs, I should say. If you have those 3 things, and that may take a while, that may take a few sessions, may take a couple weeks, you'll find that you'll clear a lot of symptoms, and you may not have to spend as much time in the other planes. Just a little something that I've kind of figured out. And it wasn't just with this guy that this helped. I also have another girl who had like a mild calf tear, probably like a grade 2 or something along those lines. And it was kind of the same thing. We, again, went through some of the basic sagittal plane stuff, saw some improvements in motion, but she couldn't squat. Once we worked on the squat, worked on a little bit of hip hinge, which is also a way to stretch the back of the hips, was able to do a heel raise without pain. So spend some time in the sagittal plane, guys. Make sure you guys really got that. Next thing, how do you guys coach exercises? Because I want to talk about how I've been cueing my exercises lately, or at least progressing the coaching paradigm. Because I have to admit, I am a recovering overcoacher. I still struggle with this sometimes. I still fall off the proverbial wagon, but I was a guy who wanted things to look pretty. Just wanted things to look absolute pretty. I wanted them to be perfect, damn near experts after session 1. And I'll tell you what, by the time they left, things looked pretty good. Next session, 1 of 2 things would happen. They'd either have the activity completely screwed up, or they just didn't do it. This happened more often than I would like. And so I had a problem, and we needed to fix this problem. So the first step that I did was, instead of giving my clients a bazillion exercises to work on, in one session, we may focus on only 1 or 2 big rocks and make sure that they completely understand what they need to do. So that's step 1, is to just have fewer exercises. Step 2 is to, when you are coaching these exercises, do multiple sets, and then you want to progress how much feedback you give your clients within each set. So let's take the 90-90 hip lift as an example, the exercise that I did a post on earlier today. So what the progression may look like is this. So first thing I do is I'm going to demo the exercise and kind of talk about the overarching concept. So I provide the client a broad overview. Right? That way they at least can kind of conceptualize what we're trying to go with. You'll notice I do the same thing in the videos. Next thing, I have them get in the position and we just work on the setup. We don't work on any type of movement execution or anything along those lines. So I pick maybe 2 or 3 big cues, make sure they have this set up perfectly, and we're off to the races. So those are the first 2 steps. Set number 1, first thing we do is I pick 1 cue, 1 big rock that's going to give me the most bang for my buck. And we just focus on that for however many reps we go. And typically with like a 90-90 hip lift, it'll be 5 breaths. Set number 2, we take that same big rock. If they're not getting it, we make sure we just continue to tweak that and fine tune it so they have it damn near down pat. Set 3, I'll add 1 other cue, something small, maybe something else just to enhance what we're doing. So that's set 3. Set number 4, I back away and I just kind of let them see what they do. And once they're done with that, I ask them feedback. I ask, what'd you feel working? How'd you feel about cue number one and cue number two? The last set, and this is my favorite because I've found this to be the most impactful for my clients, is I tell them, believe it or not, I've developed amnesia and I completely forgot how to coach this exercise. So can you coach me how to do it? So I've spent time teaching them. They've spent time struggling with the activity. And then now they have to conceptualize in their mind the steps that they need to do. And a lot of times they make some mistakes, and that's okay. Mistakes are how we learn. But it's that fifth set that they make the largest strides. And it's pretty remarkable. So once we've done those sets, next thing we do, I print them out a copy of that activity that I want them to do for home, and we go over and review it again. And what I will do is I will write on the sheet of paper how often they need to do it, sets, reps, all that stuff. And then what I do after that is I have the patient write down their cues that they need to understand, which again reinforces the things that they went through in set number 5. The last thing, and this is the key to getting compliance, and I stole this from Tim Ferriss. Seemed like a pretty neat trick, and it's worked pretty well. But after we've done all that, and I've written down sets, reps, and how often to do it, I ask them, does this sound reasonable? Rarely is someone going to tell you that you're being unreasonable. Yes, please do that, Byron. Rarely is someone going to tell you that you're being unreasonable. And if they say that that's a reasonable amount, chances are they're more likely to do it. So that's my steps in terms of how I've been coaching exercises. It's a little bit more deliberate. It takes a bit more time. You may not get as much work done in total, but I guarantee the quality is going to be much higher. Last case. This one, man, this was a doozy. Let's talk about detaching from the situation. And the concept of detachment, if you want further in depth with that, check out Jocko Willink. His book Extreme Ownership talks about it. He talks about it on his podcast. But I found it to be very applicable to this case. And Alan, I see you asked me a question. I will make note of that, and we'll answer that after this done. You do as a practice. You're gonna have to be a little bit more specific in terms of centering, but I will answer it if you can clear that up. Okay, so detachment. Here was the patient. So this woman, let's just start things off. Came in late. She overslept. Was taking her sweet time filling out the paperwork, and finally comes back to me, and we get the evaluation started. And she was really quiet. I was asking her questions that I would normally ask, and I asked, okay, what type of activities made your shoulder feel worse? And she said nothing. And I'm like, okay, that's a little bit different than what the intake form said. And then I asked, anything make your shoulder feel better? And she said nothing. I'm like, okay, it's going interesting. And then I ask, what are your goals for therapy? And she doesn't answer. Instead, she tells me this. She goes, look, how many more questions are you going to ask? Because I just want to get treatment. And I think a younger or more fresh me or an earlier me, even me a year ago, would have been like, shit, the hell with you then, right? But that's not what I did this time. Instead, what I did was I detached from the situation. I took a step back, took my ego out of the equation, was not offended at all whatsoever with why she said that. Because once I did that, I understood why she said that. She said that because she had already filled out the stuff in the intake forms. And even though I like to have that conversation and build rapport, she didn't want to spend more time rehashing the same thing over and over again. Chances are she's probably done this to multiple practitioners multiple times. She's been in arm pain for the past 6 to 12 months. I did ask one more question, and this is where I thought I was going to lose it. On her past medical history, she had a couple different things and then had DV next to these things. I had no idea what that meant, so I said, one last question, what does DV stand for? And she said, matter of factly, domestic violence. I'm like, well, shit, this is not going well whatsoever, right? And so I proceeded to stop the subjective, and we went right into the examination. Um, I made sure to kind of educate her on what I was trying to do and what my hopes were that we could achieve in terms of how our body goes into normal protective responses, and I'm trying to do activities to help you get out of those protective responses. A lot of times that frees up motion, and that'll help with pain. And I just proceeded with my examination. Made sure I asked her questions throughout in terms of, did this feel okay, reassuring her, all of these types of things. And by the end, she was laughing. We did a couple activities, and she was pain-free. Had I not detached from that situation, this would have been a disaster. Because what that did was it allowed me to look back at all the things this woman has probably gone through and not taking offense to why she said or why she acted in the way she did. Because we got a woman who's been in pain for way too long, has had a horrible life because she's been a victim of domestic violence, was probably stressed to the gills because she overslept and was late for her appointment. And I think I could have easily just brushed her off and said, look, if you don't want to be here, then get out. But I didn't. I stepped back, observed the situation, and that allowed me to form a better connection and show this woman more empathy than I may not have normally would. And I think the only reason that I was able to do that this time is because I've lost that woman multiple times in the past. I let ego get in the way, or I get too close to the patient to where everything they do, I just feel for them so bad that it impacts my clinical decision making, or I just tell my own narrative that I want to hear while not meeting the patient at their narrative and their story. But it takes being able to step back from the situation that you're in, looking at things critically and objectively, and having that sight, getting out of the weeds and looking at things from a higher hill that allows you to make effective decisions, make effective relationships with your patients, and ultimately achieve clinical success. Those are the three questions or the three things that I learned this week. Now let's answer Alan's question. Thank you. Centering to feel balanced. So Alan Luzietti, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Here's what he's asking. He asked me, what cues do I use to center, to feel balanced and zen amongst the chaos of our daily lives and fears, doubts, emotional ups and downs? I want to address the emotional component that I can't read any more than that for whatever reason. This is a tough question, actually, Alan. Very nice job. If you read Kelly McGonigal's book, and this is The Willpower Instinct, which is a great book, and I hope to marry this chick someday because she's smart and good looking. But she talks about why meditation is beneficial. And the reason why meditation is beneficial doesn't have to do with, being able to stay immensely focused on one particular thing. Your mind's normally going to wander as you meditate. Where you get the power in meditation is being able to bring back to some type of cue. And breathing is something that's very commonly used as that cue. So breathing, obviously, is a great choice for doing that. But I think when life's chaotic and you feel like it's going out of control and you never get that time to rest or whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to find something to always come back to. And that could be a multitude of things. That could be finding your breath. That could be over there. I got a picture of my mom and my sister, and maybe looking at that. Or maybe, just maybe, when you don't feel like working, you look at this gift that your pops gave you, and you all of a sudden get refocused, reinvigorated, and that's what it takes. So, whenever I have a client that asks me this question, it's more, it more involves them trying to figure out what it is that they can come back to. Whether breathe, and it has to be something that resonates with them and is meaningful to them and elicits good feelings. Breathing's easy because you can always control your breathing, so that might provide a sense of control. But something as simple as family, or maybe it's just stopping and smelling flowers. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just find your thing and always come back to that. Now, I think one other question, Alan, that you asked, which thank you for asking questions. If anyone else has questions, please fire away. I might be able to wing it. Was inhibiting the TFL. So, what do I do to inhibit the TFL? Well, let's talk about what the TFL does. Pending position, if it's my pelvis, I'm in an anterior pelvic tilt, TFL is going to do a lot of things. It's going to be a hip flexor, it's going to abduct, it's going to IR, it's going to do a lot of things. And so what I have to do is put the pelvis in a position, so to speak, that doesn't put the TFL at such an advantage to be overactive. And so what is going to inhibit a TFL? Abdominals, by establishing a zone of apposition. That allows for a little bit of posterior pelvic tilt. And again, if you look at my movement deep dive that I did this week on my blog, getting the zone of apposition via abdominals does that to your thoracic diaphragm, right? Actually, it's probably better this way. So if this is thoracic diaphragm, does that. Let's say this is the pelvic diaphragm or the pelvic floor. So I might get a little bit of pull from my internal obliques and transversus abdominis. But what I want to do is make sure that these guys are on top of one another so we can allow for multiple movements or movement in multiple directions. So the other guy that's going to bring this guy to a ascended or better position would be your hamstrings. And so finding activities that work both of those at the same time is phenomenal. Sometimes you may do, the 90-90 hip lift as a prime example, which is what I did a post on this week. And sometimes that works. But what you might find too is sometimes you may be able to establish a zone of apposition and get good positioning here, but there's still a limitation in hip extension present. And that could be because of TFL hypertonicity. There's two strategies I will use in those cases. So the first would be putting the hip into more extension. Not so much extension that they have to excessively anterior pelvic tilt, but enough that they can inhibit the TFL in a more elongated position, right? Because we know the TFL flexes the hip. So if I put them in the TFL in a bit more end range, that puts it in a position of more passive insufficiency. So you have a better shot at inhibiting that muscle. And so if you, Lance Goyke, I might have a poster, he's got this on his YouTube page, but there's an exercise called the Hemi, which is really good. And basically what that is it's using the abdominal or the zone of apposition and combining it with hamstring activation with the hip in a bit more extended position. And so what you do to activate the hamstring this time, as opposed to just flexing the knee and posteriorly tilting, is you actually extend the hip as well. And so you are contracting your hamstrings with 3 movements. And I'll tell you what, your hamstrings will be sizzling after that. And so a lot of times that works wonders. Let's say they're still limited because of TFL hypertonicity. Then maybe what you have to do is incorporate a bit of frontal plane activation. And so what I may do in that case is I'll still put them in a position where they're working on hip extension, but I may, let's say you're lying on your side, what I may do is I may have them shift the top hip back. Let's say it's left TFL. I may have them shift the top hip backwards so they get a little bit of a stretch in their back pocket, and then I'll have them IR the femur. What that does is that hopefully eliminates the internal rotation component of the tensor fasciae lata. And how do we do that? Well, the muscle that we're going to use instead is going to be the anterior glute medius. And one of the ways that we can position the femur in such a manner that it biases the anterior glute med a little bit more effectively is by doing a hip shift back. And this would be the acetabulum moving on the femur, if that makes sense. So what do we do to shut off TFLs? Get the hamstring working in hip extension and find a way to kick in an anterior glute med. So that way you take away a couple jobs of that overworked and underpaid TFL. Hopefully that allows it to relax. And I think we'll call that it for today. This one was a lot of fun, guys. So at least I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. Yeah. So how can you follow me? I'm glad you asked. Don't literally follow me, though. That's kind of creepy. But like in terms of internet following me, go to zachcouples.com. Again, if you sign up for my newsletter, you will get a free, yes, free, acute to chronic workload calculator. Otherwise, you can follow me on Facebook if you're not watching this on Facebook Live. That'd be facebook.com/Z, as in Zorro, and Couples, my last name. You can also follow me on Twitter. My handle is ZCouples. I tweet cool things. And last thing, follow me on that Instagram, yo. Instagram.com, or well, whatever. Go to your Instagram app, and it's Zach, Z-A-C, Couples, C-U-P-P-L-E-S. Also, if you search me on YouTube, Zach Couples, my name, you'll find my channel where you can watch a lot of my videos. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a good night. Keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Deuces.